Welcome everyone. Today we have another new episode, and this session is very much exclusive because of today we get very important guests from Transhumanist Party. We have our honorable chairman, Mr. Kennedy, and all of his important teammates, Mr. David Wood, Mr. David Schumacher, Mr. Pavel, Dance, Brent Elmans. And this session is completely exclusive for World Talent Economy Forums because uh, in 1971, I just want to share some of the interesting informations about Bangladesh, because today is the 50th Victory Day for Bangladesh, and this is very interesting history that this is one and only countries around the world that many of the people actually sacrifice their life only for their language and their communications, and 3 million people actually died for 9 months of war in 1971. But after the lot of sacrifice, you are observing some of the real videos for Bangladeshi freedom fighters. I am also a son of a freedom fighter. Even my father died in 2017. There are many interesting politicals and things happens in between Bangladesh and Pakistan's. India also support our liberation wars. It's a big political issues, but after the lot of sacrifice and other things, this day, 16 December 1971, we get our independence. And this is our victory day. So what the achievement of last 50 years, because there are many ups and downs. Many people think that Bangladesh is a bottomless basket, but now economically they are proving that they are growing in many ways. Even the COVID-19 situation, they're playing a very good role, but still we have lot of challenges. We have our healthcare related problem. What will happen with this vaccine, we never know. Our government trying their level best. uh, on the other hand, for our education system, definitely we need improvement. And most important thing is that politically we need improvement. Once upon a time, I also do not like politics, but after my father died, I can understand that how important politics is. And specifically, when I meet with this Transhumanist Party, I find that they have all of the modern concept. They know how to develop better policy. They know how to integrate it with the modern science, engineering, and technology. I'm sure with the collaborations of Transhumanist Party, country like Bangladesh, India, Pakistan, Indonesia, Vietnam, and different developing nations, they get a lot of interesting concept, and they can develop their policy and develop their political, social, and organizational environment. So I want to start these sessions, and I want to give special thanks to our freedom fighters, and I want to give special thanks to the family members, like 3 millions of people, those who sacrifice their life for their countries. And these sessions, definitely we're going to share with all of the important sectors, with our freedom fighters forums, with our prime minister's honorable Sheikh Hasina's office, with our planning ministry, with our education ministry, and as much as possible we will explore these sessions with our academia, because I'm sure today's presentations and today's discussion will be very much helpful. I observed last 8 months, we do a lot of research on Transhumanist Party. This is really important for the developing nation, and especially I do want to give special thanks to them, how they're contributing for African community. So maybe in Asia Pacific, their contribution can give a lot of changes. So thank you everyone, those who joined today's sessions. So I want to start with Mr. David Wood. Definitely, I'm sure that many university, school, college, they already call me, they utilizing his presentation in the classroom. And I'm sure today's sessions, many of the academic organizations, university and college and schools, they can utilize today's concept. And World Talent Economy Forums distribute all of our content completely free, and we will reach 100 million people. Already we contracted with the many universities and many political organizations. So hopefully in between 2021, we will reach 100 million people with all of our free content. So I want to start with Mr. David Wood, and thank you everyone for joining today's sessions.
Well, thank you so much, Sharif. It's a really auspicious day, and I'm glad to be part of such an event on this day, auspicious for Bangladesh. But it's also very significant times for the whole world, frankly, in terms of the rapid change that's going on. And I'm grateful for the chance in this time of rapid change to introduce the concepts of transhumanism to a wider audience. So allow me for a few minutes to explain some of the basics of transhumanism. First of all, it's a vision. It's a vision of a better world, of better society, of better humans. But it's not just an abstract vision of something that might happen some distant time in the future. It's a set of actions intended to bring about this vision well within the lifetimes of many people on this call, to develop technology, to steer politics, and to spread insight by transforming and improving education. So transhumanism is a vision, it's a set of actions, it's also a community of people who broadly share the same vision and who commit to at least some of these actions. But the angle I want to talk about is transhumanism as an ethical framework, as something that will help us all take hard choices in the decades ahead, given the many difficulties we will be facing on account of improvements in technology, such as biotech and infotech, nanotech, and cognotech, also known as neurotech. All of these technologies are opening up new possibilities that were hardly imagined before. And we're all going to have to think hard. What do we do with these possibilities? Should we accept them, or should we try to restrict them? Should we run with them or try to ban them? And science has given us the ability to do lots of things, but it can't by itself tell us which goals to adopt. For example, science can tell us if we are in a relationship how not to have babies by using contraception, but it can't tell us whether we should use contraception. Science can tell us how, in some circumstances, to abort a baby growing inside a mother, but it can't tell us if that is a good thing to do or not. Science can tell us increasingly how to select the gender of a child before it is implanted in the mother's womb, so that a family could start off, if they wished, with two boys and a girl. Is that a good thing or not? Science can't answer that question either. Before long, there will be the possibility of ectogenesis, that is, babies growing entirely outside of a mother's womb in some artificial womb. Science can tell us how to do it, not yet, but soon. Should we do it? That's a different question. And it's the same with nootropic drugs. Drugs that, if we take them, will help us to focus more, to concentrate more, to remember more, to be more creative. Are these good to take or not? Again, science can't answer that question, nor can science tell us whether we should take advantage of biotechnological changes to live much longer. So if science can't tell us the answers, where do we get our answers from? And that is our ethical frameworks. And in the next few minutes, I want to run through 3 common ethical frameworks. For most of history, most people would have said, this is not a hard question. You get your answers to all of these difficult choices by consulting the wise women and holy men from different traditions. That's how we answer these things. But increasingly, in the 21st century, indeed already in the 20th century, it's clear that this answer by itself is no longer sufficient, because there are so many different ethical religious frameworks giving us different conflicting pieces of advice. And it's also clear from historical analysis that many of the principles advocated by different holy books from ancient times have a mixed track record. They may have made sense in their original time scale, and talking about diet, the slavery, the caste systems, rules on sexuality, and often with a xenophobic overtone. But now, at the very least, we can say we need human interpretation of these principles which we have inherited and consideration. So that's the start of moving human judgment more into the center of ethical principles. The second common ethical framework is one that says, well, nature knows best. We should look at what happens in nature. We should maintain natural balances. And Eastern philosophies often talk about natural balances of yin and yang, for example. But actually, nature is not a very wonderful place. There are many terrible things that nature does. Here's a famous statement by the senior editor at The Atlantic. Nature wants 5 of your 7 children dead and wants you dead by 50. And if we want better than that, well, we need science and technology and politics. Some people have said, well, you can't do better than nature because evolution will always find the very best solutions. But people who study carefully the human body and nature find that as engineering designs the human body is full of errors, shortcuts, poor engineering choices. Here's a recent book by evolutionary writer Nathan Lentz, who talks about a whole host of problems: bad knees, head colds, useless bones, pointless genetic code, talks about the loss of the ability to synthesize vitamin C, and so on. The third framework, which is quite dominant in many parts of the world today, says, actually, we've got to think from a human point of view. Yes, we should reflect on what we can learn from nature and learn from the religious communities, which we are fond of, but ultimately we have to decide by ourselves systems that will promote human well-being. We should not put any special faith in one authority, nor should we put nature on a pedestal. And I am happy to say, as a humanist, that I start off as a transhumanist, that I start off as a humanist. I say, yes, that is the right starting point. But more than that, transhumanism goes beyond humanism. Sometimes we use the H+ to denote that. And there is the fundamental principle in transhumanism that today's form of the human species does not represent the end of the development of conscious life, but rather it is a comparatively early phase. So we shouldn't put any undue priority on protecting all aspects of today's human nature, just as we shouldn't worship nature, nor should we worship today's human nature. We can do a lot better with the help of technology, with also wisdom and care. So transhumanists often draw pictures like this. It's a bit of a comic. It's a gross simplification of what actually happened in evolution. But the point is to make people think, what's happening next? And it's not going to be biological evolution that determines it. It's going to be intelligent human choice. So some people draw something like this. We might become increasingly like a cyborg. But the main principle is self-directed human evolution. Other people draw pictures like this. Again, it's just an illustration that we will have much higher states of consciousness and well-being. So to summarize, transhumanism looks at what technology is doing. For the last few hundred years, technology has been giving us the chance to re-engineer nature, but now technology gives us the chance to re-engineer human nature. It gives us the chance, if we wish, to change our desires more radically than before. Human history has always been about cultivating our desires through meditation and prayer and education and other systems, but now we can do it more radically. So transhumanism fully recognizes we must now ask, not what do we want, but what do we want to want? And this is not an abstract discussion because the technologies of the fourth industrial revolution are bringing so much potential into everybody's hands today. So whereas many people say human nature is somehow precious, it's not to be changed at all, it's not to be tampered with, it's divinely created according to some people, or it's uniquely evolved according to others, transhumanists say, no, human nature is a mix of features. Some are exactly right, and we should preserve them. Some of them should be enhanced, but others should be restricted or transcended. That's the basic principle of transhumanism. And some people worry about this proposal, and they say, well, who's going to decide? And transhumanist answer is that we're all going to decide by pooling together the best of humanity 1.0 and figuring out together how we can get to a society that some people call humanity plus. And here I'm referring to the ideas of one of the world's leading transhumanist organizations, humanityplus.org. These principles of humanity 1.0 include scientific understanding, an appreciation for multiple historical cultures and today's cultures, integrated so that it's not just one particular culture that is dominant in that discussion, enhanced by creative imagination so that we are not just constrained by what is today, but we can imagine more, but then critically evaluated using the best of skepticism and scientific judgment. And we're going to do this collectively, and we're going to do this step by step. With a little bit more principles, I can point to the 10 things that I believe are very important to transhumanist thinking. The first is to say, don't just focus on the issues of today, because in just a short amount of years, a couple of decades, the near future can be radically better and can also be radically worse. So although today's issues are important, there are even bigger issues coming, which we need to focus on. And the difference between ending up on a radically better future or a radically worse future comes down to humans. It's not built in inevitably to technology or into the universe. It's what humans choose to do together. And so transhumanists have as their highest value promoting human liberty, human happiness, human vitality, human creativity, human bliss. How do we get there? Yes, by respecting science and data. Science isn't the value itself, but respect for science is absolutely key. Supporting individuals. This is not a collectivist idea in any sense. It is something from which everybody should be able to benefit fully. We are better, stronger together when we look after ourselves. And transhumanists look indeed beyond just human well-being to the well-being of all human-like minds, to the extent that other animals have consciousness akin to us, to the extent that AIs in the future will have consciousness akin to us. We are concerned to promote that well-being too, in a sustainable way, in a diverse way. So transhumanists, with our support for liberty, certainly support diversity and openness. There is no one holy book or pope in transhumanism. It's nothing like that at all. There is a wide ongoing conversation. Though, of course, there are some good books which are worth looking, including some of my own books, which I briefly show here, where I go into these ideas more fully. So in conclusion, the kind of vision that transhumanists have involves a super longevity, a super intelligence, a super well-being, and a super democracy, in which we significantly improve our human health with longer lifespans, transcending some of the bad tendencies we've inherited towards physical decay and decrepitude, super intelligence with significantly improved thinking capability, transcending our negative tendencies towards mental blind spots and collective stupidity. Super well-being is significantly improved states of consciousness, transcending many of our emotional black spots, our tendencies towards depression and egotism and alienation and so forth. And finally, also taking advantage of technology to improve our social relationships and overcome some of our inherited tendencies towards the abuse of power, to divisiveness, and to deceiving ourselves and each other. So that's my brief introduction to transhumanism. There are many other people on this call who will have complementary points of view, and I welcome their inputs as well. I'll hand back to you now, Sharif.
Yes, thank you, sir, for your good presentations, and that is important things from your presentation. We can learn about the transhumanist concept. I think Humaira Tanzila, she has a question. What is the concept of transhumanism? I think she can understand more from your presentation. But beside that, because many of our audience from the developing nations country like Malaysia, Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, India and this kind of countries. My point of view is that, like, in terms of transhumanism, you are talking about super longevities and many different concepts. On the other hand, in the developing nations, in the COVID-19 situation, they are in trouble. According to World Bank, 150 million peoples, they are going to be the poorest peoples. I think they are earning less than $2 per day. So in that situations, like, how this kind of developing countries, they are fighting with this COVID-19 situation. On the other hand, transhumanism is I think a visionary concept. How they can adapt this kind of policy or this kind of aspect for their country like India, country like Malaysia. Yes.
I'll give two very quick answers, but I'm sure many of the others on the call will have good answers as well. The first thing is that the main reason people die from COVID is we are old. It's aging that means that we're more likely to die from COVID. And transhumanism, in its vision of super longevity, points out that all the causes of death are typically accelerated by aging. And so we're going to address aging head on. And if we do that, then more and more people will be immune or will be much less impacted by these diseases. Secondly, one of the most interesting vaccines that have been developed with using mRNA technology. It's a brand new technology for vaccines. It's using more genetic editing than before. It's using the kind of manipulations that wasn't possible previously. As this is going to be rolled out, it allows us to be much more precise and focused on dealing with individual diseases. That is a great success with the kind of technology that transhumanism focuses on. Transhumanism is about improving all aspects of automation. The more automated society is, the cheaper all goods can become, and people all around the world will have a much better quality of life as a result. This is not a first world thing. Transhumanism is for everybody in every country.
Thank you, sir. I have my second question specifically focused on these vaccine distributions, because there are many people, they are asking me that what will be the future, even though government and media, they have a lot of commitment to the peoples. But what's the real scenario of vaccine distributions? Even the World Talent Economy Forums, we are closely working with Dr. Mohammed Yunus, and he has a concept, vaccine for common good. But what the concept you have, even I want to ask the same question where after the presentation of the honorable chairman, Mr. Gannady, because he has a very interesting write-up I saw. But what the real situations of vaccine distribution, what will happen?
So the good news is that there have been multiple vaccines developed by lots of collaborations around the world. Arguably, it could have happened quicker. There could have been changes to the testing and regulation process. We might have had these vaccines ready to deploy 6 months ago if there had been smarter systems of cooperative and voluntary testing. But we've got there now. And even if it turns out that one or two of the vaccines aren't as effective as hoped, the likelihood is out of this bundle of 7 or 8 vaccines that are well developed, at least some of them will be truly useful. There will be some cases where the vaccines have some side effects, but we are already learning about these dangerous cases, and we will figure out which vaccines can be shared. So I've changed my mind on this. 3 or 4 months ago, I was quite worried that we might not have vaccines for 18 months or so. I think the scientific community has come through wonderfully. In a combination with entrepreneurs, people who have developed this have been, in some cases, scientists, in some cases, business people. We've had the best of science and the best of businesses working together. And now we'll have the best of politicians ensuring that these vaccines are made available as low cost as possible. Doesn't mean that no profits will be made. I think it is entirely appropriate that some profits are made to recoup the investments that private corporations have made, but it should be at a rate that the whole world agrees is fair.
But you are talking about profit and other things. Do you think that there is billions of people, billion people actually live in vaccine? Like how this kind of corporation, they're fixing the price for the vaccine. Is it affordable for the developing nations?
the price will come down and down and down as it is used more. And in due course, there will be other people stepping in to ensure that the cost. It's cost effective to ensure that people are vaccinated. If you don't vaccinate them, then there's more healthcare costs, and it's a huge cost to the economy. It's also bad from a psychic or a spiritual point of view. Damages the society's well-being. So for all kinds of reasons, there will be strong pressures to ensure that the costs come down, and where appropriate, they will be given entirely free, as in many countries. The people have been vaccinated in my country, the United Kingdom. They're not paying any money for it, and I think it's the same with almost every country in the world currently. That's entirely right. This is a common good for the common progress of all humanity.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for your very good presentations. And actually, I get a lot of feedback about your presentations from our audience. They want every week, at least in World Talent Economy forums, because many of our students, they are actually getting a lot of guidelines. Even though from the transhumanist concept, they are really, really inspired. Now I want to invite young, energetic, and dynamic chairman for Transhumanist Party, Honorable Mr. Gannady. So I am sure that he come up with some of the point about these vaccine issues as well as the transhumanist concept.
Yes, thank you, Sharif. I'm quite pleased to be able to speak with you again today. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II. I'm the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party. And I think it's important to consider on the occasion of Victory Day in Bangladesh that humans have the ability to put forward tremendous effort, and sometimes at great cost, in order to liberate themselves from threats to their existence and to their well-being. And certainly this is what the people of Bangladesh achieved back in 1971. They faced tremendous hardship and tremendous oppression. 3 million of them lost their lives, unfortunately. But in a situation where there is an enemy that threatens the lives of so many of one's people, it certainly is justified to declare independence from that enemy and to assert one's own right to exist and to live unconstrained by the impositions of that external force. But I would suggest, even though Bangladesh has come a long way since then, that the people of Bangladesh have another enemy amongst them today. And it's the same enemy that we, the people in Western countries, have among us today. The most proximate manifestation of that enemy is one that I think everybody recognizes. It is the SARS-CoV-2 virus, the novel coronavirus that causes COVID-19. We are struggling with it mightily in the United States, just as people in Bangladesh and in other countries in the developing world are certainly struggling with it. But COVID-19 is just a lieutenant of the greater enemy. And the greater enemy is biological decay, which afflicts all humans today and which renders humans increasingly vulnerable to diseases such as COVID-19. People who are biologically older, who are senesced, or people who have other underlying disease conditions are a lot more vulnerable to COVID-19. And as a result, I believe it is imperative for people, not just in Bangladesh, but all over the world, for the entirety of humanity to fight a war against disease, aging, and death, so that ultimately in the 21st century, our achievement can be another Victory Day. Sometime this century, hopefully, we can declare victory not just against COVID-19, but against biological aging itself, against all of the diseases that afflict millions and even billions of people today. And that would be an amazing Victory Day indeed. But in the meantime, we are in the midst of a war. Our enemy is not human. Our enemy is a much simpler set of organisms, but our enemy is also essentially the combination of the built-in vulnerabilities of our own organisms that unfortunately undermine us every step of the way. And the difference between the transhumanist concept and the philosophies and worldviews that preceded it is that transhumanists believe this enemy to ultimately be surmountable, capable of being defeated, capable of being declared independence from. So this is what we hope to achieve. Now, we face a tremendous task throughout the world in defeating this latest manifestation of the enemy, which is COVID-19. And unfortunately, despite all the progress that has been made, tremendous numbers of lives have been lost. Over 1.62 million people in the entire world thus far, over 300,000 people just in the United States. And keep in mind, the United States is supposed to be a technologically and scientifically advanced country, and it is, relatively speaking. But unfortunately, despite the great strides made by our scientists, our researchers in the development of vaccines for COVID-19, our institutions in the United States are so broken, and our society is so flawed and dominated by such perniciously wrong thinking that a lot of the fruits of that research have yet to reach the people. And this is where I believe key mistakes were made from the onset. What may surprise many people to know is that many of the vaccines that are currently either just recently approved or in the final stages of receiving approval have been developed before the greatest death toll of the pandemic took place. The vaccine from Moderna, which demonstrated about 94.5% efficacy in clinical trials, was developed over the course of a weekend in January 2020. And by January 13th of this year, it essentially existed in its current form. Now, granted, production and distribution would have needed to be scaled up even at that point in time. But had the US government and the Food and Drug Administration in particular permitted the distribution of this vaccine to willing recipients, hundreds of thousands of lives would definitely have been saved. This is the subject of the essay that I published just 2 days ago on the US Transhumanist Party website. And the title of this essay is Reject the Deadly Precautionary Principle. Approve all COVID-19 vaccines immediately. That is the humane approach. So I would like to engage in a bit of a thought experiment with the audience. Imagine what would have happened if the Transhumanist Party had been in power in the United States in early 2020. Perhaps Zoltan Istvan, our 2016 presidential candidate, might have gotten elected president in 2016 and been president in time to respond to this pandemic. Or perhaps Charlie Cam, who was our 2020 US presidential nominee, might have been the president at that time. What would they have done? I would submit to you that the moment Moderna or another company announced the existence of a scientifically plausible vaccine candidate, the Transhumanist administration would have asked the researchers one question. And that question would have been, do you have ethical intentions in facilitating the distribution of this vaccine to the general public? And upon receiving an affirmative answer, the Transhumanist administration would have said, very well, you may offer this vaccine to any volunteers who are willing to accept it under any mutually agreeable circumstances, provided that you disclose that this has not been reviewed through the typical channels and that people are about to receive this vaccine at their own risk. So this, by the way, is the article on the US Transhumanist Party website. I would encourage you to go there to transhumanist-party.org and read it in full. However, what would have happened then? Of course, nobody would have been forced to take a vaccine they wouldn't have been comfortable with, if people had concerns about side effects or about lack of sufficient data for their personal comfort levels, no one would have been required to take the vaccine despite their reservations. However, I think a lot of people would have recognized the tremendous devastation that this novel coronavirus would have been likely to cause. Indeed, this was unprecedented devastation for the world's economies. It resulted in unprecedented restrictions on human liberty and a loss of life on a scale that we have not yet encountered in the 21st century. And as a result, I think a lot of people would have said, well, there could be side effects. There could be mild side effects, as there are from a lot of these vaccine candidates. But those side effects, they might, for most people, just be some temporary discomfort. The costs of inaction are so much worse, and they are so much more palpable, that even if the vaccines were a lot more dangerous and a lot less effective than they actually turned out to be, it would still have been an absolute no-brainer of a decision, so to speak, to allow willing volunteers to try them. Imagine in a worst-case scenario, several hundred people had died of the side effects of the vaccines, which of course hasn't happened and it's not going to happen. But that's the conceivable worst case scenario. Contrast that with 1.62 million who have died of COVID-19. And this, I think, illustrates the great moral error of our time. The great moral error of our time is called the precautionary principle. And unfortunately, the precautionary principle drives a lot of government policy, particularly in so-called developed countries, where the day-to-day standard of living is high enough to lull a lot of people, especially officials, especially people from more comfortable backgrounds and social positions, into a kind of sense of complacency. Like their day-to-day lives, they seem to be comfortable, they seem to be stable, even though the stability and comfort are essentially illusions, as COVID-19 have shown. But these people think, well, there's a lot to lose if anything has an unforeseen side effect. What they don't realize is that sometimes the greatest harms come from doing nothing at all, from allowing nature to take its course, one of the ethical frameworks that David Wood rightly identified as being quite flawed. And in this case, allowing nature to take its course has meant 1.62 million deaths from COVID-19 throughout the world. And how do we prevent that? Through an alternative to the precautionary principle called the proactionary principle, which transhumanists embrace. And the proactionary principle seeks to rationally weigh the benefits and costs, not just of an action, but also of inaction. And it recognizes the status quo shouldn't be the default option when making the decision. The status quo has tremendous risks as well. And sometimes, if you don't approve that vaccine, if you don't approve that experimental medicine for other diseases as well, diseases like cancer or dementia, or conditions like biological aging, which greatly increase the probability of nearly every major disease, then you risk imposing huge human costs by not taking a proactive measure. So this is extremely important to consider, particularly when we're faced with such glaring and palpable harms as COVID-19 imposes. I think when future humans, and those could be future versions of ourselves if transhumanists succeed in their aspirations, look back at this era, they will see the precautionary principle as being the greatest moral error of our time. It's the moral error that has led in many so-called developed countries for timeframes of 10 to 15 years to elapse before a quite safe and quite effective emerging medical treatment gets approved. Now, in the United States, the now famous Operation Warp Speed resulted in a significant acceleration of that, so that many vaccine candidates were reviewed and approved within a time frame of about 9 to 11 months, compared to a typical 4 to 5 year time frame for many vaccine candidates. But still, that's not good enough, because over 300,000 people have died in the United States. A superior approach would not have been to reject testing. Of course, we support the scientific method. We support the need to do testing for safety and efficacy in some rational manner. However, the testing should have been done simultaneously with the distribution of the vaccines, not prior to anybody being allowed to receive the vaccines. Imagine people were afraid of certain side effects for certain demographics of the population, but so many people risk their lives on a daily basis because they have no other recourse. If they're healthcare workers, if their income relies on working in a grocery store or working to deliver goods to enable many sectors of the economy to function, or caring for people who need ongoing assistance despite the fact that there's a pandemic, those people don't have the luxury even to stay at home and isolate themselves. So it's really important to consider the costs that overly protracted governmental processes impose. And it's really important to allow volunteers to try out medical treatments and emerging advances that they consider to be worth any potential risks. And with that, I'm open to any questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, sir, for your good presentation, especially your write-up. I'm sure that our audience will study on that particular point and they will get a very good guideline. Beside that, I just want to know that, because there are some question on that particular point, especially how Alia's question is that how actually just how transhumanism benefit for developing nations. So my question is that, like, main problem for the developing nations that they need to develop a better ecosystem. They need good scientists, good doctors, they need good research hub. On the other hand, I'm observing last 9 to 10 months that you have in your organizations and you have very good ecosystem. So how actually developing nations can create a like bridging, and they can get a better relationship for this kind of scientific research, this kind of development.
I have a couple thoughts
Mr.
on this. Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Well, you say that the developing countries have good institutions, and that is true. But once you have these institutions, they tend to get policies tend to get kind of locked in. So, and this is especially true with large government institutions like the FDA, NIH, where I work, they become very hard to change after they've been built up, and you have many people that are reliant, on the status quo. So the developing world has a huge opportunity to leapfrog the quote developed world in many areas. So as we were discussing, a couple things came to mind. One would be to embrace this proactionary principle, to say we are going to use to have a forward-looking policy agenda that tries to use technology as much as possible. So, for instance, you could implement something like right to try medicine, where people can try vaccines or other drugs that are treatments that are under development, with, of course, fully informed consent and an understanding of the risks involved. But that essentially, if people could, say, get access to a vaccine earlier, they could not only get the benefit of that vaccine, but the company could then track them and use the data from that to more quickly show the efficacy and the side effect rates and such and so forth and so forth. Another area that comes to mind is the issue of data, especially genetic data. In the US, the systems we have in place are not good at sharing data between hospitals. It's hard for individuals to get access to their data. So, we have these electronic health records, but it's hard for an individual to collect all of them together. So this is another area where developing countries can implement a better system. So one example would be what's going on in Estonia, where they are collecting genetic data of citizens with their consent, of course. And then that data can be used to improve personalized medicine. Personalized medicine will ultimately reduce costs because you'll be targeting treatments at individual specific genomic profiles. Whereas right now, we waste a lot of money on giving drugs to people which really don't do anything. So that's another big area where developing countries could really leapfrog ahead, I believe. And the other area would be implementing AI. I think the value proposition for AI will be greater in developing countries because there are not as many doctors available. So using medical AI will have much greater value, whereas in the United States, there may be a lot of pushback from the existing medical establishment to implementing AI. So, so these are all areas where the developing world can really take the lead, actually. And then finally, the last thing would be gene therapies. And in the West, we have a lot of a big taboo about gene therapies because of the terrible association with the terrible history of eugenics and all of that. But really, all I'm talking about with gene therapies is somatic gene therapies, where you inject something, or a germline gene therapy, which would be something like removing congenital disorders, preventing horrible disorders that you get from birth, like Tay-Sachs disease, other things. And there's really an ethical obligation to roll out that kind of technology as quickly as possible, because to save lives and save enormous amounts of money, because treating these congenital disorders is extremely expensive. So that's another area where I think like the countries in the West are going to be slow to move because of our kind of the institutions we have and some of the taboos we have, whereas developing countries can really, again, leapfrog. So I think it's very, people in developing countries should be excited about the position they are in to kind of move quickly on a lot of these technologies.
Mhm. Okay, thank you, sir, for your very good contribution for this question. Beside that, COVID as well as global warming, I think it will be the next challenges. Even country like Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Maldives, even USA, I think global warming will be the big threat for them. So in that situations, that how actually transhumanist scientist society uh, doing different initiative, or what's the plan, how we can work together, because the developing nations individually they cannot solve these things alone. The other hand, I'm just sharing one of our session informations. Swiss impact investment from Switzerland, they join in World Talent Economy Forums, and they shared only 1% of the GDP. If we like expend for our solving these global warming issues, we can solve many things. So in that situations, you are a political party, your organization a lot of global relationships, and in that situations, how we can work together for these global warming issues. Honorable Chairman and Mr. Dan. Yes.
Thank you, Sharif. And unfortunately, I only have a few minutes to answer this question, but I will point to the Transhumanist Party website, transhumanist-party.org, where we have an article entitled Ideas for Technological Solutions to Destructive Climate Change. And the fact is, climate change really can only be mitigated or alleviated through additional technological progress. It would not do to restrict the use of technologies, and it would not do to impose measures that hamper any individual's length or material quality of life, especially people in the developing world. They're already suffering a fair amount of privation and limitation compared to people in more developed countries. And I think it would be unconscionable to tell people in the developing world that they may not try to reach the same standards of living that people in the Western world have enjoyed for generations. So a technological path is the only one that I see as being both feasible and desirable. There are two constraints on the solutions for destructive climate change that the U.S. Transhumanist Party articulates. The first constraint, as I mentioned, is that solutions may not result in a net detriment to any individual human's length or material quality of life. And the second constraint is that the solutions may not involve the prohibition of technologies or the restraint of further technological progress, particularly because further technological progress is what will overcome this problem. But there are many options to consider within those constraints. We need to continue developing alternative energy sources, particularly economical solar power, nuclear power, geothermal, hydroelectric power that could ultimately compete on the basis of cost alone with fossil fuels. Development of electric vehicles increases in their range. Development of in vitro or lab-grown meat that is biologically identical to currently available meat. Development of vertical farming to increase the amount of arable land indoors. Autonomous vehicles that reduce the need for direct car ownership. Those are just a few ideas, as well as, of course, improved wildfire mitigation and management strategies using technologies to more readily detect wildfires as they occur. Perhaps remedying some of the unemployment issues that various countries are facing by essentially a more old-fashioned approach, hiring large teams of people to go into wilderness areas and clear out the dead brush that very easily catches on fire. So it's a combination of technological solutions and some low-tech solutions that could do a lot of good. And I wish I could delve into greater depth on this. Unfortunately, I do have another commitment, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here and to discuss these important issues with you and with everyone on this panel.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir, for joining today. So hopefully, we need more of your continuous support because we need a better collaborations, and by this way, definitely we can solve many of the local ecosystem problem. Thank you, Mr. Kennedy.
Certainly, thank you, Sharif.
Thank you. Mr. Dan, what do you want to add for these global warming issues?
Well, I don't have a lot to add.
Can you unmute yourself?
But I do
Yes.
really support things like in vitro meat or cultured meat, which, because and hopefully Hindus and will support that, because you're not actually killing an animal, a cow or any other animal, and that will save cost and prevent a lot of greenhouse gas emissions from raising livestock, and especially methane emissions. So that's an area, if I was in the third world, or I would be looking to market, because the technology is rapidly developing. There's a company in the US called Memphis Meats that is developing cultured meat, and also called well, it's mainly called cultured meat, but yeah. Yeah, so that's the main thing I want to pitch. But there's a wide variety of technological solutions and that can help mitigate climate change, obviously, and that includes geoengineering, if necessary. So I believe we should be researching that as a not as our mainline approach, but as a fallback option. And yeah.
Okay, thank you for your very good contributions.
And I will have to leave now,
yes,
unfortunately, but I really appreciate the chance to speak.
Thank you.
Sharif, I would like to add to the
yes,
climate
definitely.
change that transhumanism work with the existential risks at all as a category, because climate change is only one existential risk, but there is other risk which can end the sentient life on Earth, and one of some risks caused by the complexity of technological civilizations, like a possibility of nuclear war or not safe AI, and some risks is natural, like climate change or potential collision with asteroids or comets, or even such a far-fetched possibilities which seems not as important at the moment, but it is important in general, like our sun will burn out, and what's intelligent life gonna do after it? So transhumanism work with try to identify this existential risk and try to come up with measures to mitigate them, to preserve sentient life as we know it.
Yes. Thank you. I know that you have different background from science, engineering, and technology. So, if you just share more of your background with our audience, because this is the first time you join in World Talent Economy Forums, and as well as if you develop a concept that how actually transhumanist philosophy helpful for developing nations. Yes, Mr. Pavel.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, on a background, I'm originally from southwest of Russia, and I have a PhD in cultural studies. Um, Also, I'm an AI researcher, so my background kind of balance between philosophy and technology. So that's allows me to, look at the transhumanism from a broad perspective about how transhumanism can help developing nations. Well, first, I don't like the term developing nations, but we have to work with the term we have. Uh, I really like the idea of leapfrogging, and Dan and Gennady already spoke about it a bit. But it's really good when you don't have to overcome complexity of the existing infrastructure, and it's related to the policy level and a technological level. On policy level, yes, there's FDA and in other developed countries, other agency which impose lots of restriction uh, on the progress on experimentations. There's lots of taboos, and developing nations don't have this agency and don't have these restrictions, and they can innovate much faster pace. And there's technological infrastructure. Example of the how China leapfrogged the uh, communication systems. For example, they didn't have wire phones, and they transitioned right away towards mobile phones, so they don't have to create this vast network of physical wires to connect devices. They go directly to the mobile phones. This is an example how a developing nation can overcome limitations of the existing infrastructure.
Thank you. Beside that, my last questions to you actually, like, what your advice for the youth community? Because developing nations, 50 to 57% actually youth. Even in Malaysia, I think 50% people actually youth, those who are under 30 years old. As well as Transhumanist Party, we are observing there are many talented and young people, they are doing work together. And young people, they have different perceptions right now. They do not like politics, but Transhumanist is a completely different. They come up with this political idea, and many talented people actually working together. So what your advice for that particular point? Uh, like, uh, how they can engage with Transhumanist Party, as well as how it will be helpful for talented people. Yes.
Well, first, I think, Sharif, I would agree with you on politics. Like, no one likes politics, but we kind of have to do it, because otherwise our ideas not going to be inserted into the policies, into the frameworks. So our idea is not gonna come to life. It's just gonna be our dreams about a better world, and we will not be able to change it. So transhumanists have to engage in politics, other one way to influence achieving of this vision which we have. About the youth who don't want to engage in politics, I think there's a tremendous opportunity of learning new technologies. I can see that there's so many educational resources available now for free to any person in the world, and it wasn't the case even 10 years ago. Now you can go to any courses aggregation website and learn how to do AI, how to do computer science, how to learn about economics, learn about gene sequence. So there's lots of educational resources, and they're available. They basically free or at a very low cost. So I would encourage youth to go and learn and to become the experts in emerging technology, especially in the emerging technologies, in the fields like AGI, nanotechnologies, biotechnologies, and stuff like that. because we need more talent. I mean, we as a, not the US, but we as a humanity, as a civilization, we need more talents engaged into in development of the technologies, and we need more talent into the implementation of the technologies. And we need talent on the theoretical level, and we need talent on the technical and the product level, because I can see that there's a gap between fundamental science and the products which are available for the customers. So there's tremendous opportunity to contribute to the economy, to the technological progress, and to lift the developing economies out of the poverty and implement the technology to improve condition of human existence everywhere in the world.
Mhm. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Pavel. We have our another guest, Mr. Brent Hellman. I think everybody know World Talent Economy Forum about you. And recently you finished a very good event with TAF, and you are also contributing a lot in the African nations, and this is very important for the developing the humanity. Please, if you share your experience, what you doing right now in Africa, and how your TAF actually help this African community.
Yeah, absolutely, Sharif. So yeah, I'm the director of marketing over at TAPS, the transdisciplinary agora for future discussions. And our main project that we're working on currently is building a gateway for futurists into and out of Africa. So right now we're working towards creating this platform where you can get a badge and essentially become TAPsified, as we call it. And this badge would create some sort of legitimization of what you're doing. We're trying to ban all these organizations, mainly ones that are geared towards fourth industrial revolution related at tasks and activities, technology related things. And we're trying to help these folks in Africa specifically right now face outward and engage with more of a global economy and markets. And we do have the intentions of transitioning over towards Southeast Asia, as we've discussed with you. But as you mentioned, right now our big focus is Africa. Our founder is from Nigeria. We've got TAFT Africa. That's we're establishing as well, just kind of a little branch off of TAPS. But I mean, like I said, we'll be doing things in Asia, Australia, here in the US. We plan to do some more events. Right now, a lot of the stuff is, of course, virtual, which is nice because just about anyone can join us. So that's essentially what I've been doing lately. We just released a magazine at Taft, and I was actually thinking about the article that I wrote for the magazine a bit earlier when we were discussing one of the main transhumanist goals of eradicating aging, or at least mitigating the process of aging. And Kennedy referenced the idea of senescence, and senescence is the deterioration of cells and how cells age, and directly relates to how we age, of course. And what I wrote about in the TAPS magazine, though, was the poverty crisis itself. And the event that we had on Saturday that a number of you were attendees for, I discussed the fact that poverty plays a major role in determining life expectancy as well. And so with consideration to the topic that we were discussing a moment ago in regards to how can transhumanism benefit these developing nations, just simply alone, one of the major goals of the U.S. Transhumanist Party is, of course, to fight aging, to end aging. And the fact of the matter is poverty is a major contributor to what induces aging and what brings about early death. And so, that is, one thing that should be realized is the fact that it's not just about using these advanced technologies, as Kennedy referenced, when we're considering how to, mitigate the threat of forest fires, you can use these old school techniques, help people have jobs and send them out in the woods to pick up all this broken brush and debris to prevent these fires. Not everything needs to be solved with some kind of chip or computer or something like that. Transhumanism as well, something that I like to discuss with people who are new to the idea of transhumanism, because I've found that there's a lot of misconceptions that go around where people feel as though transhumanism is this sacrilegious movement that's trying to disconnect humanity's connection to source or God or whatever you'd like to call that ethereal, whatever it might be in your mind. And that's as I said, a misconception. There are, of course, members of our community who are atheists. I think one of the greatest values in our community is how diverse the members are. With politics and such, it's really great to be able to have these type of bipartisan discussions. People on all ends of the spectrum, political spectrum, are able to discuss. But in regards to the aging issue, and the poverty crisis, it's not just about using these technologies. And so, as I was saying, what I like to discuss with some people who are new to this topic and have that notion that it is sacrilegious and anti-spirituality, there's actually Buddhist transhumanism. And Buddhist transhumanism really interests me personally, and a number of other people that I'm friendly with, because transhumanism is about transcending the current human limitations and the current human condition. And for me personally, just in my own experience, meditation is a tool that's really helped me transcend my own limitations. It's really helped me I've gained so much from it, and this is an ancient technology, and it can truly help us overcome our own conditions. So Buddhist transhumanism is a much more of it's much more dealing with these etheric ideals. It's not necessarily using things that are outside of ourselves to necessarily help us upgrade our own existence, but it's open to that. And so I think that that's a great place to start for a lot of people, and that's a place where I like to start the discussion, because transhumanism and transhumanists, it's not a very cookie cutter idea. It's not a very cookie cutter term. There are transhumanists that really emphasize the humanism aspect of it, and then there are transhumanists that are incredibly nihilistic and atheistic. And and then there's you have Christian transhumanism and Buddhist and all these different realms, and it's not just one thing. And so I think that a big aspect is realizing that it's something that we can all involve ourselves in. And these conversations, they don't have to be so big and tough to understand. The stuff we're discussing here today, anyone can really join in on these conversations. Transhumanism, though, in terms of politics, like I said, it's really it's a situation where people are able to understand these true threats, these existential threats to humanity as a whole, and help us overcome these things. And it's not just about there being one way to do things, and that everything's going to be fine once we all have computer chips in our body, or some wild wacko perspective like that. It's and there's it's just interesting to me to see these knee-jerk reactions from people that don't really engage with the community, and they've heard a thing or two here and there, and it's just it's interesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Brent Illman. And we know that your team, TAF team, actually doing a very good job in Africa, and hopefully soon we saw some of your activities in Asia Pacific. I'm sure that Asia Pacific youth community, they will enjoy the contribution of TAF. Now I request Mr. David Schumacher, he is contributing a lot for World Talent Economy Forums. So what's your idea and concept you want to share about the Transhumanist Party?
Yeah, hi, Sharif. Thank you so much for having me back on. For those that know me, they know that I work with the U.S. Transhumanist Party as Director of Applied Innovation, and I also work with the Arizona Transhumanist Party. Arizona here in the United States is where I'm from. Today I want to talk about some thoughts that I have about transhumanism in the 21st century. And I want to really touch on 3 points. I want to talk a little bit about transhumanist values. David Wood did an excellent job of that, and I have a couple of things that I want to share as well. Then I want to talk about what makes the 21st century unique. in our experience. And that's going to center on this idea of exponential change. And then I want to wrap up by bringing that together by talking about what we need to do in this world of exponential change. How do we handle the ethics? How are we agile enough to be able to adapt quickly as the exponential curve rises steeply? So first, I want to refer back to what our chairman, Gennady, had spoken about. He'd given you the URL for the U.S. Transhumanist Party's website. And I would encourage anyone to look at that, and you'll be able to follow some of the points that I'm speaking about there today. First off, as we start off talking about transhumanist values, I think a good place to look at that are organizations like Humanity Plus that David Wood mentioned, and the Transhumanist Party. On the Transhumanist Party website, you'll see that we prominently say that we are putting science, health, and technology at the forefront of American politics. Now, it is the U.S. Transhumanist Party, but we also accept members, associate members from anywhere around the world, and we're very interested in helping in places such as Malaysia or any place that we can help. And you'll see that we have specific platform initiatives that go beyond the borders of the United States. When it comes to the party values, the two main party values are to improve the human condition for as many people as possible. And of course, we're doing this in politics. And as others have spoke about, politics can be kind of a dirty word the way that it is currently seen throughout the world, but a necessary thing that we have to do. Our focus in the Transhumanist Party is on policy rather than the way politics is generally seen. So like, for example, here in Arizona, I'll work with elected leaders or people that wish to be elected leaders to try to bring these transhumanist ideas to them and perhaps have them adopt them as they move forward. We've elected to do that here in Arizona over, for example, the traditional third-party method of trying to put our own candidates into office. That's something that we may do at some point, but right now we're working with what's established. So, core ideals. Core ideals, significant life and health extension, once again, through science and technology. That's our main theme. We look at an atmosphere for culture, society, and in politics on reason and science and secular values. And I want to stop and speak about secular for just a second. The way I use the term secular means neutral values in regard to religion, and I'll have more to say about that as we go on. And then the third core ideal is, once again, use science and technology, incorporate rational discourse, and work towards eliminating the various existential threats that we have to the human species and for all of planet Earth, for that matter. So that's a background of where I come from as far as ideals, values, from a transhumanist perspective. Now let's talk about the 21st century. What makes the 21st century unique from the centuries that have gone on before it? Well, back to the idea of this exponential expansion of technology and innovation. Today, in my local area here in Phoenix, Arizona, I can take a self-driving taxi, for example. Just a few years ago, that would have been unthought of. I myself, here in Arizona, suffered a shoulder injury that was best repaired not by surgery, not by medication, but by stem cell injection. And I did that here about 2 years ago, and it's made a tremendous difference for me. Once again, that would have been something that would have been unthought of just a few years ago. Now, perhaps some other things that are more common that we're starting to take for granted is like laser eye surgery and being able to go in and make corrections. And then people that I've worked with having implants, hearing implants. So one of the people that I have recently worked with was not able to hear in his childhood, and is now able to hear and converse and work in a business and in a technological environment today. These are changes that are coming quickly and will be expanded on. So I want to point out, I saw one of the comments about the issue of people interpreting what some of the things we talk about in transhumanism is in science fiction. Part of my job as Applied Innovations Director is to show them the things that are coming, to show them the things that are now, things that we can do now and in the very near future to try to dispel the idea that any great progress is too far out of scope to be talking about. That's clearly not true. And if you read people like Ray Kurzweil, somebody that's very prominent in the transhumanist community, I'm going to put a link in the chat that perhaps Sharif can look at and share if he wishes. And it talks about Ray Kurzweil, Singularity 2045, for those that are not familiar with him and some of his concepts. And I want to run through just a short timeline that is talked about in that article and in other places as well. And it goes back to this idea of near term. It's 2020, almost 2021. And Ray Kurzweil has the idea that by 2029, that we will see something on the order of human level intelligence. This goes to the discussions of AI that we've had on here. That is a very short time away. And the things that are coming just right beyond that into the 2030s are things like building on the idea of the implants for hearing. We can bridge the idea when we talk to people about perhaps bridging ourselves in a way that does sound like science fiction today or a crazy idea, which would be able to connect parts of the brain to artificial intelligence or other data sources itself, or perhaps even a shared experience in the cloud. This is 10 years away, 15 years away, a very short time frame. And then perhaps 2045, and there's many other things we could talk about in between. 2045 has been the date that's been most widely talked about as something called singularity. The idea when computers, AI, overtake the abilities of what an unaugmented human brain can do. So I think it's important that the idea that we maybe be able to interface ourselves with that technology before it becomes something that can think and reason faster and more beyond us is a critical idea. But I present all of this with the idea that there is a lot of change coming. We are approaching the steep path of an exponential curve, and we need to be putting ourselves into a place where we can adapt to that. One of those that's coming along that can be somewhere in the 2030 range, maybe even closer into the end of the 2020s, is this idea of longevity escape velocity. I'm very interested in that sort of thing. Longevity escape velocity, for those who don't know, means is that we can apply techniques, treatments, whatever, that will be able to retard, roll back our aging process at the speed that we age. So if I age a year and I could take a treatment to roll me back a year, then I become essentially staying at the same age I am. Perhaps as technology moves forward and we move higher up on this exponential curve, we can actually improve upon that as well. But I want to talk about the timeline and how short that is. So how do we go about adapting ourselves to be able to do this? We have ethical considerations. We have considerations of science. We have considerations. There we go. We have ethical considerations. we have scientific, we have reasoning considerations that we need to take into account. And I believe this goes to the idea that Brent was talking about, which is that transhumanism by its very nature is a big tent. We have people from all different varieties and walks of life. And Brent was talking about the areas of faith, the areas of religion, and you rightly spoke about different forms of transhumanism that embrace that. And that's one area that I would like to see embraced overall, because I think that because transhumanism sees the biggest picture possible and what we can do for humanity, that it's not an either-or situation when we come to faith and when we come to reason. As a matter of fact, it is to our advantage to have those working together, because as those work together, we bring in all the different possibilities that are available. And we can do so, I think, in a faster timeline than we would be able to do otherwise. So I think that the merger of faith and reason, as far as an and, not an or, not competing for what is right and what is ethical, but both contributing to what is right and what is ethical, is what can allow us to move quickly. And we need to move quickly with the exponential world that we're coming into. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your very good presentation. I directly want to go for some of the common questions, because maybe it will be helpful for our audience, and you have to understand they are from different cultures, different concept. It's difficult for them, but we are trying to help them to understand the transhumanist concept. I directly want to ask Mr. David Wood, because he has a futuristics organizations, and he come up with the different idea in World Talent Economy Forum about the healthcare systems, about the new science and technology. So, sir, what the new things you want to add beside this transhumanist concept for modern technology? This is must, like you can give up at least 3 idea that the developing nations can adapt for the futuristic idea.
So the first idea, which many people are thinking about, is to focus more on prevention rather than cure. And once people get cancer, it's very hard, frankly, to get rid of the cancer when it's spread widely throughout the body. That's where a lot of the large pharmaceuticals are investing a lot of their research, because they can actually make quite a lot of money out of that. So there is some logic for them to focus on the treatment. But it's far better and more cost effective if we can understand at an earlier stage what are the likely drivers of cancer. So looking at the early detection and looking at the prevention. And the prevention involves multiple things. It certainly involves having a little bit less stress in your life. It involves managing stress. It involves having a good, healthy lifestyle. But there is more than that. It is monitoring what's going on in the body. And thankfully nowadays, there are more low-cost systems to monitor what's happening in the body. So that's one area to look at, early prevention and detection rather than expensive and difficult cures. Second thing I might look at is pioneering changes in how politics works via something called the citizens' assemblies. Citizens' assemblies are kind of an improvement on today's democracy, which happens that the electors get a vote every so often, but then they don't have much of a say until the next election comes round. Citizens' assemblies, on the other hand, are mechanisms a bit like juries in court cases. Juries are selected randomly, not entirely randomly, but they are brought in, and they are asked to study for a period of time a particular question. And in a legal court case, there are experts who come in and give their evidence. Well, it looks like there is good examples around the world of people making progress with citizens' assemblies. I can point to some very successful ones that have happened in the country of Ireland. Of course, that's a developed country, but I think the same mechanism can be adopted more widely elsewhere. And if people are interested in how the citizens' assemblies can be made to work and can be adopted more fully, then there's a recent London futurist event called the, let me make sure I get it right. It's by George Zakardakis. He is a Greek software engineer who gave a talk about reinventing democracy. You will find some details of that event online. And if you watch out in a few more days' time, there will be a recording of that discussion. But you can read about the citizens' assemblies too. So that's a couple of examples that I would point to as where people in developing countries can help pioneer better ways forwards, grasping some of the mechanisms which are now becoming available, like low-cost sensors to determine the state of people's biology and medical systems. And in the case of citizens' assemblies, many of these discussions inside citizens' assemblies can be helped by low-cost artificial intelligence mechanisms.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Pavel, I have some interesting questions like that. Yes, we are learning a lot of things from the developed nations. You have better science, better engineering, better technology. Besides that, developing nations has some different things. They may have different invention. They may have different financial policy. Example, Malaysia has Islamic finance. Bangladesh has microfinance. On the other hand, they have different science and technology, which is invented by the local scientists and engineers. So how they can is there any possibilities in the future the Transhumanist Party, they are also getting some different concept and different ideology from the developing nations, and they adapt it, or they can make a proper research or making a bridge in between developed and the developing nations?
Well, the thing is how innovation works. It's all inventions not happened in one place. It's not like all technology was invented in Europe. There's fusion between Middle East, India, and like fusion of cultures, exchange of ideas. For example, algebra was invented during the golden age of Islam. And now, based on this algebra, we have artificial intelligence and deep learning. So it's not like, everything been done by Europe and now everyone use it. So lots of cultures involved already in the technological progress, and many innovation built on top of the foundation, which was laid by sometimes unknown inventors, because we don't have any records about these inventors. And yes, the more think about different cultures, it's not, and different languages as a one specific case, it's not that we, like different cultures, just name things different words and different sounds. It's a different perspective on the universe, on how to, how it should function, how life should be. And the more we bring different cultures, the more we engage in dialogue between them, the more diverse and more crystallized ideas we will have. So Transhumanist Party, US Transhumanist Party, strongly encourage the dialogue between innovators from different cultures, different countries, to engage in this dialogue and see what innovation can come out.
Thank you, Mr. David Schumacher. What do you want to add in this point, like how?
Yes, I absolutely agree with Pavel that good ideas come from everywhere, and we need to be open to those good ideas, and hopefully everywhere is open to those good ideas. One of the things that I see as a problem, though, is especially in more structured countries, perhaps, or I don't know if structured is the right word, but in my country, what I see, and here in Arizona, what I see is a great reluctance to being wrong. When I talk to political leaders and so forth, they want to go with something that's going to make them right all of the time. And that goes back to the precautionary argument that Gennady was talking about. We want to make sure that everything is exactly the way it needs to be, so that if a political person can't then be criticized by the opposition for why they were why they did what they did. I think this is something that as transhumanists and whatever label we want to put on, especially in this area of exponential change, we need to not be afraid of wrong answers, but keep adapting towards what the right answers are. And I would promote the idea that as long as we are moving forward, errors are not a problem. A term that I picked up from David Wood is we want to fail forward. We want to take those failures and we want to make that work with the betterment of ideas. So good ideas come from everywhere. Let's keep trying those ideas and let's look at this as a continuous process, not as one problem, one answer, let's move on. It's a continuous process.
Mr. Brentelman, what? Yes.
I would like, Sharif, I just want to add one thing about othering. You know, we used to live in a framework where there's we and there's others, like other tribes, other groups. And what we try to overcome in USTP is to create larger concept of we, in which we include not only all people on Earth, but also all sentient beings, like potential, for example, potential AIs, sentient AIs, or uplifted animals. So by overcoming the othering and in creating this concept of we can accelerate innovation process and incorporate as much ideas from all around the world as.
Thank you, Mr. Brentelman. Yes.
Absolutely. And yeah, as I was trying to kind of put some words into it earlier, the fact that transhumanism and these conversations that we have in this community, some of them, they are these, they are hard to grasp for people that haven't already, learned about some of these topics, senescence and, longevity and life extension, programming and AI and 3D printers. At a face level, some of it is kind of daunting for someone that doesn't really know too much about it. But we can all add something to the conversation, as Pavel and David are saying, it really doesn't require some kind of prerequisite to be able to contribute to these types of discussions. A major thing that, Tom Ross talks about in, value of human nature is the value, the capacity that humans have towards identifying problems. And that this is going to be something that we're going to have to continue to foster as time grows on. And we're working with these highly advanced systems, working off machine learning or artificial intelligence to help solve our problems. We're going to have to start focusing on finding the problems, instead of solving the problems. And we've really been in this, epoch where everybody's trying, we're all trying to, these scientists and doctors and researchers are trying to solve problems. And, but there's millions and billions of people out there that every single one of them could tell you a list of problems that they see, that there's nothing happening to fix those problems. And when we start realizing that there's value in the sense that in the fact that we can identify these problems, then we can have the motivation to bring these problems to the right people. And I know very well that it's, it's really tough sometimes to, for instance, go to a doctor and be like, hey, this is a problem I'm dealing with. And, these are some potential solutions that I've heard about, most of the time you try to talk to a doctor like that, and they're going to be like, whoa, that's my job. They're going to get all offended and it doesn't really go anywhere, And I think that as we move towards this age, though, where we start recognizing that anyone can contribute, and that there's, trying to solve problems in using the exact same style of thinking that we've been utilizing for the past 30 or 50 years, it hasn't done anything thus far, and so we really do need to make some of these major changes. We need to fall forward, as David and David are pointing out, and we need to utilize these advancements and these breakthroughs. The mRNA vaccine. In the fact that, as David and Kennedy were talking about, the fact that these inventions and these applications were created months and months ago. We could have had millions of lives saved, hundreds of thousands of lives saved, but we're thinking in these terms of fear. And humans really, we have this issue where we need to control things and we need to know how things are going to go. But the fact of the matter is, with this vaccine, for instance, we might not have known how they were going to go if we tried to fall forward in that instance. But we can very clearly see how things went because of the fact that we leaned into our fear and we needed to control all these little variables that we'll never really be able to control. And, we've seen hundreds of thousands, millions of deaths attributed to this caution. And, there's these forward-thinking progressive ideals really need to be embodied by more people. Here in the United States, we've got the left and the right, and the left is progressive and the right is conservative, but we really need to all be utilizing these forward-thinking ideals. And it's not about changing everything to make things unidentifiable, but it's just about trying to figure out what actually works, and asking the right questions, and realizing that there's no wrong question and that everyone's capable of asking a question, because there's plenty of people that just don't really feel comfortable voicing their own concerns or the questions they might have. But the question that they have in their mind may cause some kind of crazy chain reaction to be the next breakthrough, because somebody asked the question to the right person and that conversation, turned into X, Y, and Z. And, we really need to stop thinking with fear so much and start, thinking with solutions.
Thank you. I get a very good question from one of our audience. This is the last question I want to take. Mr. Daniel, his question is that what is the proper ratio between finding problems and solving problems? I want to start with Mr. David Wood.
It's a great question. I think we have to distinguish between small problems and possibly immense problems. There are some things that could go wrong, which would be a shame that if they went wrong, but it wouldn't be the end of the world. People sometimes distinguish between harm and ruin. So yes, there could be some mistakes in the vaccines that sadly might even kill numbers of people, but it's very unlikely that a vaccine will actually wipe out the whole human population, whereas so many people are dying from COVID. However, there are other possible solutions in mind to some problems which could have a very bad, unexpected side effects. So Daniel Elton earlier raised the important topic of geoengineering as a possible alleviation to climate change. He recommended we study it, and I entirely agree we should be studying geoengineering, which includes things like pumping particles into the stratosphere to mimic the effect of a volcanic eruption and reflect back into space some of the incoming heat of the sun. And there are a whole host of other possible geoengineering solutions. Now, I believe there are scenarios in which a well-intentioned geoengineering solution would actually have a catastrophically bad impact for the whole of the world. We might push the Earth's climate into a much worse state than intended. So we must be aware of the difference between small problems and large problems. At the same time, we must be aware of the difference between small gains and huge gains. And so, yes, we should work from time to time on our current projects. That's important. We mustn't let the great be the enemy of the good, which means when we commit to a project, we should work on it for a while. But then after doing it for a bit, a so-called sprint, you need to reflect and say, well, actually, where are we going? What have we learned? Are there potential big new opportunities that have come to light? Or are there potential big new risks, which would cause us to re-evaluate? And that's why I say in the end, the transhumanist key values include the recognition that things could be so much better than today, not just a little bit better, not just people living 5 more years, but people living potentially indefinitely in an enormously good state of health with enormous experiences and great creativity. No poverty whatsoever, no scarcity of anything fundamental. But equally, there are very large risks ahead, which Pavel, I think, mentioned in terms of not just climate change, but also artificial intelligence having bad consequences. And I agree with that analysis. I think there's at least a 25% chance that by the middle of the century, artificial intelligence, if not managed properly, if managed carelessly, due to bugs in its design or bugs in its implementation, could have pushed humanity into a dark age. So we need to spend some of our time examining these existential risks and ensuring that we have good solutions in place in time. So we need to do both. And we need to also do things rather than just philosophize about them. And then once we've done them a bit, we need to philosophize some more. So it's a spiral. And that spiral is at the heart of the agile mechanism, which is the key to all success.
Thank you, sir. My last questions, I want to ask these questions to everyone. This will be the concluding remarks as well, how we can develop better policy. I want to start with Mr. David Schumacher, then Mr. Pavel, then Mr. Brent, and final conclusion from Mr. David Wood. Mr. David Schumacher.
Yes, thank you. Another great question. And this goes back to, I think, one of the basic tenets of transhumanism is bringing in as many different ideas from as many different areas as possible so that we can focus on what those particular issues are. And that's the reason I spoke about integrating faith and reason together, but that is just one example. There are many other examples that we need to use as we go about doing this. So that would be the main thing that I would put forward.
Thank you. Mr. Pavel. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, thank you.
About the policy, I think we need to first research the audience which this policy will affect and what this audience think about the policy, and we need to get the feedback from people who are going to be affected by the policy, what effect they want. And we also need to, as David mentioned, about analyzing the long-term consequences of the implementation of the solving different problems. We need to think how the policy will affect us in long term and short term, and how can we use the policy to improve condition of human existence, not create more problems.
Thank you. Mr. Brentelman.
Yeah, I think that a big factor in my mind is the idea that we talk about here a lot in the U.S. is the bipartisan support of policies. I think that there's too much focus that's put into identifying differences and trying to see that the opposition doesn't agree with me on this. How can I convince them that abortion is bad, or how can I convince them that we need socialized medicine? And I think that it really does a disservice, because there are just certain types of people that are just always going to feel a certain type of way. And I think that trying to convince people of something that they can't, that they are not going to ever be convinced of, is just a complete waste of time and a waste of resources. And so I think that finding ways to create policy that utilizes the bipartisan support, finding these people that have these inherent differences, get them to put those differences aside, and then understand that if they can come to an agreement on these other types of policy, then you may find that you'll have a widespread support for it, because it has this bipartisan support. And so I think that that's one of the most important aspects in my mind, because you have these people that they're all like the Green Party in the United States, for instance. Everybody in that party they all kind of agree with the same sort of stuff. So it's great for them to create some sort of platform or policy that they want to start trying to support. But at the end of the day, they're never going to convince the opposition to support this stuff, because they've never really considered that perspective. They're not going to convince. Maybe they will. Sometimes you will see libertarians in the Green Party supporting the same ideas, or these big extremes supporting these same ideas. But I think that it's important to try to find those things that those differences of opinion can both agree on, and to really work on those rather than wasting time dealing with these inherent differences that are going to be so difficult to overcome.
Thank you. Before Mr. David Wood, I just want to add that World Talent Economy Forum, Asia Research and Development Institute, and Al Noor Academy, we are working together. We are trying to solve different local ecosystem problem, as well as we are collaborating like Transhumanist Party, like TEF, and different organizations. So as much as we can team up together, we can solve many problems together. This is the objective of World Talent Economy Forum, and I want to give a special thanks to all of our guests, those who joining every time and give us a lot of support. And we have different kind of audience, and different universities and different policymakers. They are actually helping us and supporting us, and I request everyone need more of your support, need more of your collaboration. Maybe we can change many of human lives. So Mr. David Wood, I request you for the concluding remarks.
So these are great answers already from Brent and Pavel and David. But I mean, here's my sort of summary from the slide I showed earlier, but let's draw attention to it again. How do we develop these policies that can actually make a difference? And as has been mentioned, we need to draw insights together from a variety of different perspectives. We need to know what evidence there is, scientifically grounded where possible. We need to appreciate multiple points of view from different cultures. We need to see that not just from one party point of view, but ideally learn from other parties too. And we need to critically evaluate it with our collective wisdom. The final point I'll stress, this point here, we do it step by step. We're not going to get the right policies perfect the first time. We need to experiment a bit. We need to trial them. And we can also learn from what happens in other parts of the world. I mentioned citizens' assemblies, for example, as an example of one mechanism to work out some policies. I mentioned some positive examples in Ireland. I should also have mentioned some positive examples of citizens' assemblies in South Korea, as explained in the book which I referred to by George Takardakis, the book called Cyber Republic. So we can learn from how they're doing it in other countries, and we can try and apply the same principles in our own countries. And then in turn, we can share our successes and failures, and we can collectively become better. And also, it's not just learning from the processes, it's learning from the planks that are already in place. And I refer to the planks on, for example, the US Transhumanist Party's website. They have developed a number of policy planks where people have already thoughtfully gone through a number of iterations on key policy areas. Now, these policies may not be appropriate in exactly these forms in all parts of the world, but they are good starting points. So I encourage you to look at them and to look more generally at what transhumanists and futurists and humanitarians of all sorts are proposing around the world so that we can benefit from what all of us know. As has been said, if only we knew what we knew. Sometimes we don't share enough or understand enough what we know, but let's get better at having these collaborations, and then we can truly set aside some of the unhelpful ideas and move forwards into this much better world, which is within our grasp.
Thank you. Today's session, I'm sure it's one of the best sessions for World Talent Economy Forums, and definitely we're going to share. We have different groups as well as in offline. We have many students. We will distribute all of your content. And this is our objective in between 2021. We want to achieve 100 million people, not only in internet, also in the offline. Already we are collaborating with the many universities like Daffodil University, Cambrian Education Group, United Universities, Dhaka University, International Islamic University, University of Malaya, and many interesting education institutions. We are working together. So hopefully your contributions will be very, very effective for the young people, for the youth community. Thank you for today's sessions, and thank you for your valuable time. And I want to give thanks from core of my heart. And today actually like our 50th victory day, and I wish that we can overcome the COVID situations, and we can make our global situation better and better in the futures. Thank you for your valuable time and contributions. Thank you, audience, for your continuous support.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.